Good afternoon, everybody. It's 2 o'clock, so we'll actually make a start to the meeting. A big welcome to the South West London Integrated Care Board meeting. Just a reminder that this is a meeting held in public. It is not a public meeting. Also, the meeting is being broadcast online and it's being recorded. The recording will be uploaded onto the ICB website after the meeting, and a version with British Sign Language will also be produced and uploaded. Because we're recording the meeting, I do ask that everybody uses the microphone when they speak at the meeting. That allows us to record. Also, should anybody require a hearing loop, the microphones are essential for that to work properly. We will be enjoying the benefits of the 120 Broadway fire alarm system at 2:30 for a test. It should only last 20 seconds, so please ignore it, and we will pause the meeting at that point. If the fire alarm should ring at any other time, please follow the green signs to exit the building. Questions from members of the public will be taken at the end of the meeting. Should there be any questions received in writing before the meeting will be prioritised. If time allows, we will take further questions from members of the public, and one of the team will be available to hand you a microphone. We've received apologies from Matthew Kershaw, Place Member for Croydon, Shannon Katayo, Place Member for Wandsworth, Karen Broughton, Deputy CEO and Director of Transformation and People, James Blythe, Place Member for Sutton, Martin Spencer, Non-Executive Director, and Jacqueline Totterdell, a Partner Member for Acute Services. Can I check, Ben, are we quorate? Yeah. Thank you very much. I'd also like to note that this is Mike Jackson's final meeting as a member of the Integrated Care Board, and would like to thank him for his contribution. So please join me in thanking him. We'll now move on to declarations of interest. There is a full declaration of interest in the pack of papers. Can I just check that there are no additional declarations of interest which members haven't registered at this point? No, thank you very much. If we can note the register of interest. Move on to the minutes of the 17th of July for approval. I'm not going to do a page turner here, even though they are very exciting, but can I just check that people are content that these are an accurate record of the meeting? Thank you very much. Thank you. So we will approve the minutes. I'm going to ask Sarah to talk us through some decisions the decisions that have been made in other meetings. Sarah.
Yes, so the part two at the last board made a decision to approve the award of NHS core contracts under the provider selection regime. That is commercially in confidence, but we have done that now, and we're reporting that back through this meeting.
Thank you. We will now move on to the Chair's report. As you can see, it's a rather brief Chair's report within the pack, but I did think it was worth drawing attention. So clearly, at the last meeting, we were a couple of weeks just after the election of the new government. That government has been active in commissioning a range of reports and documents and reviews across various departments, and health is no exception there. The first of those reports, full reports which have been published, is the Aradazi report, which was published last week. It's a rapid review of the state of the NHS, assessing patient access, quality care, and the overall performance of the health system. It's billed as a diagnosis and needs to be seen in the context of a further report which will be produced in the spring of next year, which will be our 10-year plan. And the 10-year plan will be the treatment for the diagnosis which Darcy has made, which is a fairly damning reflection on the state of the NHS, what's happened within the health service, and the reasons why the state of the nation's health has deteriorated, with a surge in long-term mental health conditions, amongst many others. He notes a significant lack of capital investment and a failure over many years to shift the dial in terms of moving from acute into preventative and anticipatory healthcare, issues that we've discussed as an ICB many times over the last 18 months. The Prime Minister has also said that there will be no additional funding for the NHS without reform, so we await the plans for reform which will be set out in the next 10-year plan. I think it's important to note that the Darcy report reaffirms the government's in 3 core pillars that they announced in their manifesto and have reconfirmed subsequently, which is a shift from acute services into primary and community care, a shift of focus from treatment into preventative action, and a shift from an analogue system into a fully enabled digital system. Again, all 3 of those things that we've talked about. All of that, those 3 core missions, whilst we move forward on elective recovery. So they're, if you like, the tasks that we expect that the 10-year plan will be outlining for us moving forward. We can anticipate that the operating plan that comes out in Christmas will capture many of those things for the year 25-26. But again, we await to see that. Clearly, a pivotal moment will be the budget, which will give an indication of the level of funding that we can expect in the year ahead. As I said, further funding increases will be subject to the pace at which we can deliver reform. There are other reports which are going to be forthcoming. I think the most significant one of those will be the Penny Dash review into the Care Quality Commission and the overall regulatory framework. The initial report that she produced in the beginning of September actually highlighted quite a significant range of challenges within the current Care Quality Commission regime. We know that she is now looking at that within the context of the whole range of other regulatory and assurance processes that exist. I think both Sarah and I have been briefed by Penny, and we are anticipating quite a significant shift in focus, which we think is likely to determine the new government's policy in relation to the CQC and the future regulatory and quality improvement regime. So I think we are in for quite a busy time, I think quite an exciting time, and I do think that as a system in South West London, we can be pleased that we've at least begun anticipating some of those in our most recent discussions as a board. So thank you for I'm not going to say any more in terms of the Chair's report, but hopefully that provides a little bit of a framing for the rest of the meeting. If there's any questions, happy to take them. Otherwise, we will be having a seminar on this at some point later in the autumn, as the full range of reports begins to emerge. Thank you. We will move on to the next item, which is over to Jonathan for an update on urgent and emergency care.
Thank you very much, Chair. There's 3 items that I was planning to cover under this In Focus topic this afternoon. The first is our winter plan for the coming winter period. The second is a response to the focus and the right focus on pressurised services, in particular corridor care for patients experiencing urgent emergency care issues at this point in time. And the last is a little bit of a look forward for the next 2 years as we see it in urgent and emergency care, and trying to look a little bit further forward in how that's taking shape. So those are the three elements. It doesn't feel like it today as the sun's shining, does it? But according to NHS England, winter started on Monday evening when we got the winter letter. But for us, it probably actually, in terms of planning for it, started in the spring. So there's been an immense amount of work through the spring and summer to make progress on that and to agree where we are on that. So hopefully you can see the fruits of that in the papers presented here. On the second topic, it builds on the around pressurised services. It builds on what NHS England's expectations are for treating patients appropriately and with dignity and respect in relation to urgent and corridor care. And on the third area, the operational processes are, of course, omnipresent, aren't they, really, in urgent emergency care? And this is an opportunity to really think over the next 2-year period what we're trying to achieve. I've gone for 2 years because, as Mike's already alluded, looking a little bit further forward is quite challenging in the context of a new government. But I also want to get us all thinking further forward and focused on some of the bigger strategic issues that we face, like digital enablement and the likes, as part of what we're planning to do. So those are the areas I'm going to cover. I wanted to also say a few thank yous to people for helping pulling this together. So thanks to colleagues around the table, because there's been an immense amount of work to pull this, involving all the partners and your teams across the organisations, including your local urgent emergency care boards, the South West London Urgent Emergency Care Board, and also to say thank you to the ICB team involved. And I'm pleased to say we've got Alison Perfo in the audience this afternoon, who's been the interim Urgent Emergency Care Director, and we've also got Lisa Hayward, who's just started as the new UEC Director. The former in green and the other in blue, for clarity, if it's not clear to people. So thank you again for all the work in pulling this together. So if I start by talking through the winter plan, I think if it's okay, Chair, we'll sort of pause after each section for any comments that people may want to draw out. So as I've said, this is looking across the services we need to support patients and staff through the coming winter period. I think we also need to acknowledge it's incredibly pressured at this point in time already across the whole system too. And this paper also seeks to explain how we've invested the winter funding that we receive, the non-recurrent winter funding we receive, and also actually the adult social care discharge funding as a system we receive, and make the most of those resources at this point in time. So the paper starts by talking about what is new this year, recognising that not everyone will have waded through every page of everything here. But just to draw out a few things that are really different this year. So we've had a very intensive focus for the last 9 months now on reducing length of hospital stay, which has increased considerably since the pandemic, and we are making progress in a number of our trusts in that area. So that will benefit patients, or benefit staff, or benefit our productivity as a system too. The second thing is to note the introduction of a new vaccination for respiratory virus for those over 75 and women who are pregnant at this point in time. So to note that. I think the third area I probably want to draw attention to is the plans that we put in place around primary care for this year. So in previous years, we've ended up doing it sort of lastminute.com, putting additional resources into primary care, but we have made significant investment in that space for early on this year, so that we can put those arrangements in place early and use the resources most effectively, and indeed learn from previous years. And then finally, the progress we've made in ambulance handovers, so that people are not in the back of an ambulance for extensive periods of time, and with significant progress in reducing those who spent, particularly those spending more than 45 minutes in ambulances, which allows ambulances to get back on the road and support people more effectively in the community. So those are some of the things that have moved forward. There's other things on that list that people might also want to draw attention to. The pack then just tries to set a little bit about the scale of urgent emergency care and set out the local context so that colleagues are fully aware of that. So there's an elegant infographic that sort of sets out some of the challenges and opportunities there and the volumes of work that are taking place in different sectors. And there's also an update on performance and the progress that we've made in a number of areas, such as improving our performance, albeit from a place that none of us want to be, but improving our performance on 4 hours from attendance to a decision or not, whether to admit a patient, improvement in our 111 providers' performance, but also note some of the challenges, like I do at every board meeting, around the number of patients who spend more than 12 hours in our emergency departments for both physical and mental health issues. So the plan builds on the national requirements, the UEC 2-year recovery plan. It also reflects more recently published guidance as well about the expectations of improving performance on 4 hours further and our ambulance category 2 response times. Maintaining the capacity that we've planned for as a system is also seen as something that is key for us. Increasing productivity too as a system, and continue to develop services as we've made a commitment as a board to shift from acute to community, one of the themes that Mike talked about at the beginning. So that sets out some of those key objectives for our plan. And then in more than a dozen areas, and I won't go through, you'll be pleased to hear each of them in detail, but I'll give a headline from each, just to give and illustrate to the board the sort of breadth of what we're talking about. It gives a sense of what we're trying to do as a system, prepare properly for winter. It's probably also worth reflecting, we'll of course build on the winter plan letter that NHS England published on Monday night, which of course is not built into these slides as yet, though the themes are, as you would expect, redolent throughout what we're presenting here. So, so just to pick through those areas, not necessarily in a particular order, but on same-day emergency care. We already were a leading light in terms of the trusted assessor model, particularly between the ambulance service and clinicians in emergency departments, and we want to build on further on that. On frail services, we want to build up our frailty hubs that bring things like SDEC services, virtual wards, UCR, urgent community response services together as a whole. I've already talked about the really extensive programme of work that we have on length of stay and where we're seeing some progress and where we need to make further progress over the coming months. On critical care, it's really important we have the right configuration of critical care services, both to support the urgent emergency care pressures this winter, but also to continue to provide complex elective care surgery. So we've been working with the Acute Critical Care Network to deliver that. There's a slide that talks about reablement and intermediate care services. And for each of the boroughs, we've given at least one example of a scheme that is in place, and many of which provide some additionality over what have been in place in previous winters. On hospital, home, virtual ward, we continue to expand our capacity to the equivalent of 415 beds through winter, peaking at 425 virtual beds in terms of capacity. So how we're continuing to grow the sort of hospital, home, virtual ward element. On urgent community response, as a system, we've sought to enhance that service and strengthen it further. It delivers a really good and timely service, but its scale could be bigger, and its opening hours could be longer. So it's going to be open 8 till 8 across all our boroughs is the intention through the winter monies that we made available. On enhanced health in care homes, the illustration I'll give is the intensive support service that we put in place, and we're actually putting this in place for the third winter, though we planned it earlier this time, that relates to patients who need care home capacity but exhibit challenging behaviours and are often quite difficult to place in homes. So a team to practically support our hospitals and our system in delivering that. And we've also invested for the first time in some initiatives around end-of-life care, particularly helping primary care and some of the assessment capacity that we would like to put in place to support end-of-life care too. Talking of primary care, as I said earlier, we're planning to put more in place over the Christmas, New Year festive period than we have done previously, and certainly giving people, federations and the like, time to scale that capacity up. On 111, our service is in a better position as it's stabilised since the change of provider, and the key feature there will be continuing to recruit the key clinical and non-clinical staff and build some new aspects like the mental health first aid advisor roles in 111 service. I've already talked about the new respiratory vaccination, but to remind people about the COVID and flu vaccinations for the year ahead, and that's a very practical example of prevention that is very, very cost effective, so a really important thing for us to be on the front foot for early. On mental health, we now have 111 Press 2 live, which I don't think we did at this point in time, and we're also trialling front door triage at both Kingston and St George's hospitals as evidence of further progress since last year. As a system, there are clear expectations in the winter letter about how we coordinate our work, and we have a system coordination centre that works 24/7 to join the dots, and where there are issues that require escalation to manage those well, and the paper touches on that. And of course, as ever, we're nothing without our workforce, and there's a slide that sets out some of the proposals and plans to support what our staff are experiencing, real pressures and an incredibly challenged environment, and looking after their mental and physical health through this period and providing support. For all of those, we've also set out challenges and risks. We all know how incredibly difficult this winter period is going to be. That's ahead for us in the slides. And then we also set out some of the communications and engagement plans, including the element that those of us at the last board meeting will remember Charlotte and colleagues from the voluntary sector so eloquently set out around the winter campaign. So there's some further illustrations of the work that we're doing in that space too. And then finally, there is detail of the winter funds, how we've spent time thinking about how we're going to invest these since March onwards. We've been very careful to reflect on these through local UEC boards so that everyone's had a chance to input, through the South West London UEC board, to reflect with the integration director the alignment with the adult social care discharge fund, and to reflect on trust plans to deliver length of stay reductions, as we've asked trusts formally for length of stay reduction plans. So we try to carefully triangulate what we're doing with the priorities at this point in time. And as I say, it's a complementary aspect. There's a slide on the Adult Social Care Discharge Fund that is formally signed off through Health and Wellbeing boards, but it sets out some of the process and governance to try and ensure we use that funding effectively. And the appendix provides a little bit more detail on that. So hopefully colleagues feel it's a really comprehensive package for this winter. It won't mitigate all the challenges and risks that we all collectively will face. Keen to think here if people feel we've missed something or there's something we could further hone and refine. and look to the board after some reflection for hopefully for some endorsement of the winter plans. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And at this point, I would normally go to your co-chair or co-SRO, Matthew Kershaw, but he's actually at his own other board meeting today, so we won't be going to him. But the government's focus is naturally on the acute hospital end. I will come to primary care because clearly that is a key part of this. But Joe, as Chief Executive of an acute trust, I wonder if you'd like to comment, because I know that you've been closely involved in working on this and your team have as well.
Yeah, no, of course, Mike, and it feels like we've been sort of in winter and planning for winter for most of this year, so it's a sort of continuation of a theme. Certainly within our hospital, we've got an extensive programme of work around our ED department as well as flow throughout the hospital. And what we're also doing is working really closely with our local partners under the auspices of our Reset Urgent and Emergency Care Board across both Kingston and Richmond, where we've recently walked through our preparations for winter. Jonathan's referred to a letter that arrived with us earlier on this week, which we need to reflect on further. But we've been working closely with partners, not just focusing on what we can do within the four walls of the hospital, but also thinking about what more we can do to augment what most importantly goes on outside of hospital. We've got a particular focus on frailty anyway, but we're going to ramp that up over the course of the winter. We're looking to see whether we can do more, and we think there is potential to do more around our virtual ward and giving that more of a sort of out of hospital focus, which I think would be really positive. Working very closely with our local authority colleagues who are leading a piece of work across both Kingston and Richmond around discharge planning, particularly also looking at how we can get a bit of traction on those patients who no longer meet the criteria to reside, and we're also trying to drive down length of stay, although for us that has appeared a bit stubborn, frustratingly, within Kingston. And then clearly, as I'm sure we'll all be doing, you know, the sort of really impactful thing that we can do from a public health perspective is absolutely push and promote the vaccination programme. So we're standing all of that up for both staff and for patients ahead of winter. So you know, we know it's going to be difficult. We're confident we're doing as much as we can do, and if there is more, you know, and we're open to new ideas, so if there are more that does come to the fore, we'll make sure we do it both locally and within the hospital.
Thank you, Joe. I'm going to stay, Mike, I'm aware that you want to come in, but I'd just like to sort of stick on the trust side, then pick up on the primary care point, and then I'll bring you in, Mike, if that's okay. So, Vanessa, clearly we're putting £1.3 million into mental health services as part of the winter plan, and a key anticipated outcome from that will be the reductions in length of stay in ED departments for people with mental health conditions. I wonder if you'd like to outline the thinking behind that and how the anticipated level of benefit.
So I think as well as focusing on winter in the ED departments, we focus on winter for mental health patients per se, because it's not just the patients that are waiting in the ED departments that we will focus on, it's the patients that are waiting across the community to prevent them from coming in. We have had positive input from the 136 hub suite, which has reduced the number of people presenting and requiring that intervention, which is really important because it's least restrictive practice for our patients, much better outcome for them, but it also reduces pressure not only in the ED departments but also for our police colleagues as well. The 111 Press 2 is undergoing further publicity because it had a soft launch, and we're seeing an increased uptake in calls and quality experience, and we're just trying to track that through in terms of what that then translates in terms of where patients go thereafter, hopefully coming through into our services. What we really want to focus on this winter is making sure that those people who are known to our services are able to access the care and treatment they need without attending to the A&E ED departments, in particular when... Pause. And it's always as soon as someone gets up that the alarm goes off, isn't it? Sorry. So the main piece of work that we are doing to support flow through the system is improving the length of stay work within our mental health service provision, because actually timely access to beds is critical to supporting that flow. We have commissioned, in addition to the actions that Jonathan's noted, we've also commissioned a piece of work with GERFT, Getting Things Right First Time, to come in and just triple check that all of the actions that we've got on our plan are, one, the right actions, and two, that we're not missing anything that other systems are doing. That will report in October and November time, and we'll progress that with pace. Other than that, I shall pause, and I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. If I could go to our colleagues from primary care, and if I could go to Nicola first, and then Annette, you may want to add something afterwards.
Yeah, thank you. I would really like to welcome the additional kind of advance warning and the planning that enables us to do in primary care for the winter, because we've learned now that actually we can do it even better. We do a pretty good job of doing it at short notice, but we can do it even better when we have advance notice, and those appointments are really critical in the system in the winter. But just more broadly, really, and you'll have heard me say this before, Jonathan, I think so, your fantastic infographic on page 33 just demonstrates the order of magnitude impact. 700,000 per month GP appointments. When a small thing doesn't work very well in general practice, the impact that kind of skitters along the system can often be in the urgent and emergency care system. But it works the other way around as well. If our urgent and emergency care system doesn't work well, then general practice is unable to be as effective, and it's a two-way thing. So I think it really speaks to the kind of the pointers that we've got in the Darcy document, which says this is where we really need to focus our efforts. We can have very, very, very good urgent and emergency care, but it's not going to be as good if our general practice and wider primary care doesn't work as well. So I'm kind of looking forward to the next bit, but great so far for this winter, so good, thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. Annette.
Thank you, Mike, and I echo everything that Nicola has just said. Just to say, in addition to that, I think primary care is gearing up for a big vaccination programme. I hope we don't have too much vaccination fatigue this year, because I know with COVID, doubled the number of vaccinations. But the RSV vaccination is going to be really key. Likewise, I think something we could look at for next year would be working with public health colleagues to look at how we might increase the uptake of pneumococcal vaccine. I think that's a really important pre-winter thing to do, and we don't have to do it only pre-winter because the vaccination lasts a lot longer. So you can do that in the summer months when you're not so busy with all the other vaccinations. So just a little punt from me with my respiratory interest there. We're looking locally in Kingston and Richmond, particularly at how we can enhance the effects of some of the other things that we're doing as part of the UEC work by bringing in primary care where it makes sense, and particularly also looking at rolling out a proactive care model into our care homes, which hopefully will help to further support some of the efforts in the winter. And I think really nice, as Nicola said, to have that funding up front and earlier. But as we've said, it'd be very nice also to start thinking over the next year how we can enhance that even more, enhance even more what we can do in primary care by putting some more resource in. Thank you.
John, did you want to come in on the vaccination points?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I just echo that the conversation so far? I think we're having a different conversation to 2 years ago. We are talking a lot about primary and community care. 2 years ago, I think virtual wards were something we didn't really understand what they're going to take off, and now we can see we have a programme that's much more developed, which is fantastic. Really welcome the early signalling of investment in primary care, because I think that will make a difference in terms of GP appointments. And I'm pleased that we're able to talk about immunisations and vaccinations. Just to say, I know it's just one slide, but rest assured we're coming to board in November with a comprehensive update and stroke deep dive onto the whole immunisation programme in South West London, which will hopefully give us some pause for thought and thoughts about optimism. So that will be coming in November. But just to pick up on Annette's point about vaccine hesitancy and vaccine fatigue, they are real things. It doesn't just apply to COVID and flu, it applies to everything, which is why we're working closely with our comms colleagues to think not just about communication, but more importantly engagement. And some of the elements of the Winter Investment Fund going forward is about how we're going to work with voluntary and community sector to deliver these, or encourage people to get immunised as opposed to just to immunise them, because I think that's a trust piece that we're continuing to work on where we'll get the real gain. So more update on the comprehensive programme that is immunisations, which we've already had that conversation at SMT, and we'll finesse that for board in 6 weeks, 8 weeks' time.
Fantastic, thank you for that, John. That will be really, really helpful. Sarah, I will be coming to you because I want you to pick up a little bit about the communications around vaccines, but more generally with the public about the sorts of services that we have, and we know that the voluntary sector plays a vital part in that. But Mike, if I could come to you, because the local authority perspective is really, really important here.
Thanks, Mike. Well, I mean, like everyone else, I do welcome the focus on keeping people well and avoiding admissions. I think everyone has said that. I think my plea is when the pressure's actually on and the numbers are going in the wrong direction, we need to retain that focus, and it may be that we need to do even more of that. Not do what we all tend to do, which is then start to focus on the discharge end, which is important, and we do need to do that. But it's just a plea that we avoid switching attention when things get really difficult, probably continuing to do even more of the support for primary care and continuing, to encourage people who haven't got vaccinated. There's no point at which it stops being worthwhile doing that, and I just make a plea that when the pressure's on during the heat, if you like, of the winter, we retain that focus on avoiding admissions and not just switch attention to the discharge end.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you. Sarah?
I've got some questions that I can maybe ask later as well. But yes, absolutely. I think the voluntary sector plays a key role. We've seen with the Winter Engagement Fund last year how important it is to relate and engage with tiny grassroots organisations. I think with a very small amount of money, we were able to reach out to 84 different ethnic groups. And that kind of shows the diversity and the level of reach that you can have working with voluntary sector groups. And we're talking about very tiny grants of £500, and the impact of that pot of money is significant. So absolutely, one of the questions I had about the plan was to do with how can the voluntary sector kind of be involved in putting a plan like this together, if you want, because I was looking at the theme of patients flow in discharge, and obviously we've got some key providers like, I'll give you an example, AGK Sutton. They told me that they're well embedded in the hospital discharge program for over 65s. They do a home from hospital service, and so they're really well placed to contribute to plans like this. And I just wanted to make sure that they have the opportunity to do so.
Just to thank you, Sarah, for the question, because it's so important what the voluntary community sector do to support us. And I think particularly around, Mike told me not to hark back to discharge, now I'm going to talk about discharge, but particularly around that, the role that organisations like Age UK play, the role that the Red Cross plays in Croydon, I know as an ICB we spend over £2 million a year on those voluntary sector organisations because we see them as such a key part of what we need to do, and I hear there's an offer to do more. So maybe outside here we can think about how we build that in to our plans going forward. It's also a key theme of the 2-year plan that we're going to talk about a little bit later. So there's some fantastic work on which to build, and thank you for highlighting it.
Thank you. Elisa, yeah, thank you.
Just to build on Sarah's point about engaging with the voluntary sector to reach communities, we've been at HealthWatch have been doing some work with GP practices and have heard that they would like more standardized information with public health messaging, especially messages that are already ready to go out in easy read or in various languages. So it's just one request I'd like to raise. And the other thing is the 2-year plan references working with HealthWatch to gather people's experiences around the implementation. And I just want to say we do welcome an opportunity for collaboration and an opportunity to have those conversations as early as possible. Thank you.
Elisa, thank you for that. And I don't know whether Jonathan or John could say whether we have sort of any forums with our directors of public health where we could actually develop some standardised material for general practice.
So yes, we do have regular conversations with our colleagues in public health, so happy to take a look at that, Mike. Could just to add one further point, just thinking about the model of care, and in Jonathan's plan is the role for primary care. Now, we have talked a little bit about general practice, but what we haven't referenced is our colleagues in community pharmacy. So we're doing a huge piece of work in community pharmacy, building on some of the work we did last year. We obviously have Pharmacy First, which is a national initiative, which we've rolled out successfully across South West London. And in addition to that, coming down the track is the independent prescribing pathfinder sites, which we've rolled out, starting particularly in Sutton. So this is about supporting community sort of services, whether it's primary care or general practice, to offer greater availability of services for our patients to augment what general practice does so well and is delivering so well. So I wanted to reference other partners in that community space.
Thank you. Thank you. And one thing I just wanted to note, Jonathan, because I am really pleased that we are featuring virtual wards, which John highlighted that a couple of years ago we probably wouldn't have had those in our winter plan. We have the largest and I think the most well-developed virtual ward programme in the country. I think that's something we can be hugely proud of. John and I are meeting up with the Tony Blair Institute soon to showcase the virtual wards, which I think is an indication of South West London's achievements in that space. So I'm going to ask people if they endorse the plans and the associated investment to support South West London system ahead of winter, seeking to develop a safe standard of care for our patients over this period. We're going to look at the assurance aspects and the 2-year plan aspects next, but just to are people content with this as the plan for the year ahead and the way in which we're choosing to allocate the funding? You've got your endorsement, Jonathan. Now, if you could tell us a little bit about the assurance process, which I think is sort of fairly straightforward, and then we'll move on to the, we'll endorse that hopefully, and then we'll move on to the framework for the next 2 years.
Yes, conscious there's a lot of ground to cover here in these slides. So I think hopefully colleagues have had an opportunity to look at the rightful and appropriate focus that NHS England has cast on pressurised services, and particularly on corridor care and patients' experience of corridor care. I think it's really important to start by saying that waiting times, as we've talked before, are unacceptable for patients at some time, and that people are living and breathing that experience regularly. Not all the time, and not all in all places at all the time, but regularly. And obviously, that's not the sort of service and the position we would like to be in. Having visited all the emergency departments across South West London over the summer, you get a sense of the immense effort that staff are putting into every day addressing the scale and the challenges that are faced by patients, and the immense amount of mitigation that goes in place to ensure that patients are well hydrated, they're fed appropriately, their baseline assessment of their needs is met. Should their pain or their condition escalate, that is well managed. But it's also important to acknowledge that it's sometimes quite difficult to deliver what we would all want for our own friends and family around dignity and respect for patients who are in corridors, or to provide access to washing and toiletry facilities in the way that we would like. So I think the Prime Minister described it as broken, not beaten, didn't he, recently? And certainly some of that rings true given the scale of challenges that many patients and indeed the staff supporting them experience at this point in time. So I wanted to set that by way of context. And then for the sake of time, I won't go through them, but there are 7 areas of assurance that NHS England has sought in terms of just the headlines rather than going through the detail. One is about, have we delivered what we said we'd deliver in the recovery plan? And we had a conversation at the Quality and Performance Oversight Committee when they met recently about where we were on that, and we sought some additional assurance from trust colleagues, because obviously not all of this, but a lot of this takes place through trusts. Assurance around the basic standards of care being provided and meeting the Care Quality Commission's fundamental standards. How we as a whole system are working to support, including the out-of-hospital element, and making the most use of, as we've already alluded, the Adult Social Care Discharge Fund, but also the Better Care Fund to support patients. In-hospital operational grip, so things like the 7-day hospital services audit, and how are we doing on that. The visibility, so important, the visibility of executive and non-executive leadership, and indeed our role as an ICB too in the system at this point in time, with some illustrations of that. And then the governance, which includes the governance both within individual trusts that we sought some assurance on, but also through the local urgent emergency care boards, the South West London Emergency Care Board. And you can see on slide 76 of the deck, the trusts have also been working through an assurance process against this. And then the very final slide just notes, as you would expect me to do in a meeting involving system partners, to note this is a whole system response. It's whilst a lot of this responsibility obviously firmly rests with acute trust colleagues, it requires, as we just alluded to in the previous article, a real focus from primary, community, mental health and local authority colleagues to deliver the best we possibly can. So that's a hopefully clear and abridged summary of the ask and where we're at.
Jonathan, thank you for that. I'm going to ask Joe to comment on those of the 7 which actually relate to the trust governance arrangements, including things like NED walkabouts, just so we get a flavour of those, Joe. And Elaine, then I'm going to come to you to ask you to explain a little bit about how we pull the assurance that takes place within our individual institutions into something which is meaningful at a system level, which allows us to be assured of the quality of care. So Joe, over to you first.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Mike. So we've recently taken a review of where we are against the sort of part 2 of the UET recovery plan through our board, as you'll see within this pack. We have regular NED walkabouts throughout the trust, but there's a particular focus at the moment on ED, given the sort of feature that is corridor care that's been with us for many months now. So there's an acute focus on maintaining safety within the ED department. So it's a regular place that is visited in the trust as part of programmed, non-executive as well as governor walkabouts, and that all feeds into our quality governance process. What I also chair at the hospital is something called an ED and Flow Programme Board, where we run through the sort of high impact areas that we should be chasing down in order to improve UEC pathways within the hospital, as well as other initiatives that we need to be progressing. That meets on a monthly basis. It feeds in summary form both to our place-based urgent and emergency care board, as well as providing updates into the board too. We've got a fuller update going to our board next week, and we have a regular standing item around what is happening within the ED department as part of our Part 2 agenda, and that will continue to be the case until we're in a place that we can tolerate, because I don't think any of us are comfortable with the situation as it currently is. So this is a really top priority for us and has a lot of visibility.
Thank you, Joe. I think that's really helpful to get a flavour of the assurance that happens within individual institutions. Elaine.
Thank you, Mike. I think I'd like to echo Jonathan's comments in terms of saying a thank you and a congratulations to our clinical colleagues in our acute trusts. There are pressures within the urgent emergency care pathway, as we've alluded to, and our colleagues work incredibly hard to maintain patient safety and to meet those demands. I personally visit all our ED departments when I'm visiting my CNO colleagues and when I'm in the trust as well. I go and talk to staff. It's on the top of the list generally when I have one-to-ones with our CNOs in terms of assurance. I think the model that Joe has alluded to is very similar to all our acute trusts. They all have focused emergency improvement meetings within their organisations, given the well-documented challenges that they have. We are part of those as an ICB in terms of assurance. We've done some MDT visits to our ED departments where we're working with colleagues across the system to be able to look at best practice, to look at learning and sharing that. So I think we're in a good position in terms of knowing what's going on and supporting across the system for urgent emergency care. I think it's something that we talk about a lot at the Quality and Oversight Performance Committee, as well in terms of seeking assurance and being clear where we are, because we are aware of those challenges and potential risks, and the mitigations are in place.
Mercy, do you want to add anything on that as chair of that committee?
No, I think Elaine's summarised it really well. It is key actually to every single meeting that we have, because it's a key indicator for us as well. So we look very closely at mitigations and actually in our risk register as well. So just to assure the board, it's always under our review.
Thank you. So can I ask the board to note the assurance report, and can I just check that you're all happy to endorse the approach that Jonathan has outlined? Thank you. Jonathan, we've prepared the winter plan in the context of a plan for 24-26. We know that the 26 bit might change as a result of a new government, but I think the principles that you've established, it would be really useful to articulate, because I think they're strong and powerful. But Jonathan, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mike. And we're working hard in the Urgent Emergency Care Board. I think it went 3 weeks in a row in August to pull this plan together. And as I said earlier, I really wanted a plan that allowed us to look a little bit forward up from the day-to-day operational pressures that so many people experience, but not also look too far ahead in the context of a changing government. So this is, I think, intended to be our guiding light over the next couple of years as an Urgent Emergency Care Board. It is a live document. It's not fixed. We can amend and hone it as needed. It's been built up with over 100 people involved in its development and a whole host of work streams and working groups, including a number of clinicians and patients at points in its development. It starts really by setting out the urgent emergency context, which you'd expect us to do. It also tries and joins in other pieces of knowledge that we have. So, for example, the work across London that NHS England led on deliberative events across the capital, to be clear about what expectations patients had of accessing urgent emergency care, and the national survey of health watches as well as part of the building blocks, as well as all the intensive local work and working groups that have been in place really over the last 18 months to deliver this. There are 4 themes that we agreed with those 100 people. So accessing urgent and emergency care, patient flow and discharge, supporting and developing our workforce, and productivity and efficiency. Probably none of those come as any surprise. We've set some key outcomes that we would expect to achieve over this 2-year period, and against each of those themes we've tried to identify the key areas we will want to make some progress in. So just picking theme 1 given time, and just some early headings. So the first heading about equity of access to urgent and emergency care. So looking beyond the immediate pressures to thinking about what we should be doing to address health inequalities as a system in terms of accessing emergency care. Or the second point on that slide, building on 111, but also thinking what more we could use through digital technologies, both at the front doors of hospitals, using the NHS app, and through 111 to support people in decision making. So hopefully it's a natural and logical build on the winter plan that we spent some time talking about earlier. If I had more time, I would go through each of those areas in some detail, but I'm hoping people have had an opportunity to read and absorb and feel that we're broadly on the right track, and if not, then please course correct. I would note the work on workforce and how important I think that is, given the issues that we've just been talking about, how really difficult it is for frontline staff at this point in time, and actually bringing to some of those life some of those words around workforce, which we often talk about and then struggle to practically implement. And I'd also note the work on productivity and efficiency, because keeping people in hospital is obviously not normally good for them, but certainly isn't good for our financial health as a system too, and there's a real focus in this work on that. We set out some key measures of success. They're all the usual, for those of us who live and breathe NHS performance standards. There's a lot of those that you will be familiar with, but I think we're trying to develop some beyond that around patient satisfaction, staff satisfaction too. And then the final 2 slides said we've asked the leads of these work streams to say, so how are you going to start implementing this? Overseen by the UEC board for South West London, but how are you practically going to start taking steps forward in these areas? And the last couple of slides summarise their thoughts and reflections on how they're going to do that. So again, for the sake of time, slightly abridged, but hopefully gives a flavour of what we're trying to do.
Jonathan, thank you for that, and I think a really powerful fact that this was drawn up by 100 people. So this is a really broad piece of work. I think the 4 themes are really, really good. What I'm really pleased with is that they reflect our commitment to primary and community, as well as the obvious needs within an ED department itself. I thought that was great. That was reflected in both the access issue, but also in workforce and the productivity and efficiency section. So it felt very, very good. And this is a great framework for moving forward. I think there are further things we could hang on it. I think certainly as we begin looking at the digital investments we could and should be making, particularly in primary care, this will actually act as a good frame for focusing those investments. The final thing I'd say before opening up this to questions and comments is in my visits around all of the ED departments across all 5 of our hospital sites, there's probably only one which I think is fit for purpose. The rest are from poor to shocking in terms of the adequacy. So our ability to meet the challenge which is set out in NHSE's letter, I think is very difficult, but it also reflects the lack of capital funds that we've had within the NHS, which were reflected in Aradati's report. So I'll pass this open for comment, and I know Charlotte would like to come in.
Yeah, I would just like to say thank you for the collaborative approach for kind of planning the near future. Your team have been really good at having really good conversations, and I think particularly pleasing is in slide 94 in the key measures of success. We're talking about, you know, clinical outcomes and performance outcomes, but we're also talking about patient satisfaction metrics. And I think, you know, for us who are out in communities, that's really important. So how someone is clinically and how the performance is and the time is really important, but how patients feel about their treatment, I think it's really good to see that it's in here and that we're going to work with Health Watch to make sure we get that independently. So it's a thank you, because I think it's difficult to look ahead when the day-to-day is so busy. So pleased about that.
Are there any further comments or points of clarity that people would like to make for in relation to this? On that, Joe, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so it's more a reflection that I'll take back locally, Mike, because on the key measures of success, I wondered whether, I think Annette, it might be helpful for us to think about maybe whether there's some leading indicators as opposed to just lagging ones of the things that we might look to be happening in order to affect that shift from hospital to out of hospital or analog to digital, that might give us some clues that we're doing the right things that we should then expect to translate into the lagging indicators that we've got here as measure of success. I think that's what I've just shared.
I think that would be really, really helpful, Joe. And I think that yes, clearly that would be a Kingston issue, but I think that the work that you do in that space, it would be great if we could share it with the other places. Thank you. Jonathan, I am assuming, I'm not getting no looks of dissent, that we fully endorse the plans for the as set out for the next 2 years for urgent emergency care. Thank you, and thank you to the team of a cast of 100 behind this particular programme.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the board's endorsement.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the South London Partnership, the London Mental Health and Community Partnership, and we're going to be looking at the achievements to date. And it's over to you, Vanessa.
Okay, thank you. I'm really delighted to be joined by my colleagues, Amy from South West London St George's, Jeremy, who is the Director for South London Partnership, and John, who is our SLAM lead from Croydon, a Service Director from Croydon. So firstly, I wanted to thank you all for taking the time for reading this paper. This paper is in the context of the term mental health, which covers a wide scope. So I just wanted to take a few minutes to think about that. So there's mental health and well-being, and the prevention work that we can do around that. And then there's mental illness. And this paper focuses on the provision around mental illness, because we need to remember as a board that mental illness has massive health inequalities, not least the 20 lost years that people with mental health conditions, they're 5 times more likely to die before the age of 75. And the premature mortality rates for those from our black and brown communities is 50% higher. So it's in that context. The old CCG, if I'm allowed to say that, I'm not sure how we frame it, commissioned a review of the best way to deliver mental health services in South West London, and that provided very clear direction around setting a clear mental health strategy, which we've done and the board has approved, and moving forward with a mental health provider collaborative. And the South London Partnership provides us with the umbrella to be able to do that. So what we've set out in this paper is some of the next steps, and so Amy's going to kindly take us through some of our achievements today and the next steps.
Thanks, Vanessa. So my name is Amy Scammell. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at South West London St George's, and I've been working with colleagues on this presentation for you this afternoon. I'll start with some thanks. So thank you to Jeremy, thank you for John. Thank you to our colleague Kate Lillywhite, who's my equivalent at SLAM, who can't join us this afternoon. Katie Thomas, our Programme Director. Lucy Waters, Director of Integration here at the ICB. And finally Maureen, who's helped me finalise the slides and get them ready for you. So we provided a set of slides that tries to cover off two things. Firstly, it tries to give you an overview of our South London partnership. And then secondly, it tries to describe our development of a South West London mental health provider collaborative. If I take each element in turn, I think it might be helpful just to start by thinking about the South London Partnership, SLP as we refer to it, as being a partnership across all 12 boroughs in South London. It really focuses on areas of highly specialist service where there might be small cohorts of patients with really complex needs. And actually, what we want to do is to try and adopt some of the approaches that have been successful through SLP for thinking about our South West London communities and our local mental health services. So it might just be helpful to hold that in mind as we talk about these two different but related elements. So if we start with SLP, Jeremy, Vanessa, you're both there since the very beginning. I think we began in 2017, partnership across the three trusts, so South West London St George's, South London and Maudsley and Oxley's, covers all 12 boroughs, and we cover a population of about 3.7 million people. The broad intention has always been to raise the voice of mental health and to really be able to advocate for those with mental health conditions. We started off with work around new models of care and forensics and CAMS, and we've now got 7 programmes, and we cover a whole range of different issues. You can see within the pack we now have a really formalised governance structure. So we have programme boards, we have a chief exec chaired monthly portfolio board, and we also have a committees in common structure. We now also cover about £180 million worth of delegated commissioning budgets, both from NHS and this ICB, but also South East London ICB. And we've included in the pack some of the successes that we believe we've had and the differences we've been able to make. Not all of those are just related to quality. Quality is the driving force of this work through clinical leadership. But you will also see that we've been able to make reinvestment into wider mental health pathways. So we've been able to become more efficient at how we deliver those services to service users across those 12 boroughs. We've also included in the slide deck a recognition of the challenges, because partnership working is hard. It's enormously rewarding, but it is really, really challenging. And so actually a number of the challenges that we sort of face are live and continue to exist. So that might be around time and capacity to dedicate to building relationships and resolving challenges. It might be around finances. So we know that some of our programmes are pressured. It might be around being able to meet patient needs, because population and patient need is changing, and we see that where we have patients with higher acuity or with more complex needs coming through to our services, that we need to therefore adapt our provision. And then finally, it can be difficult to balance all the elements of quality at times. So there are challenges that we work through, but actually collectively, I think we're pretty successful at rising to those. Finally, we've just offered some thoughts, really, around what makes the South London Partnership successful. And I think if I was to boil it down, others will have their own views. It's probably the relationship between the three trusts and this really positive leadership structure that we have in place, and the fact that we are clinically led through our programmes. So that's our summary of our SLP work, and I know we're really happy to take questions on that when we conclude. The second section is around developing the mental health provider collaborative in South West London. I guess by way of background, we've got a really strong foundation in South West London for collaborative working. We've been really, really fortunate in that we've jointly produced and published a South West London mental health strategy, and you can see some of the core elements within the pack. We've also got a partnership delivery group for mental health that Vanessa chairs. That's been in place for 2 years, and it has good representation from across health and care, the voluntary sector, and our local places. So again, a real partnership approach to trying to identify the priorities for South West London and tackle those as we move forward. We believe that focusing on a mental health provider collaborative in South West London will allow us to do 3 or 4 key things. The first of those is to think about standardisation across our 6 boroughs and tackling unwanted variation. So that should mean that wherever you live in South West London, you will know what services you will be able to access, and those services will be available to you based on the needs in your communities and in your boroughs. We want to be able to bring people together to design those services and to think about how we meet need in the most effective way. We also want to think about how we allocate resource. So actually thinking about communities that sit across South London, across South West London, across all our 6 boroughs, and thinking about where we may need to allocate resource in order to meet those needs. That might look different to how it looks now and how it has historically looked. And then I suppose we've included also a few sort of the next steps around this work, and I hope that gives you a sense of how we're trying to progress this. So we think the core areas of focus over the coming 6 to 18 months are thinking about core offer for adults and for children and young people for mental health, thinking about how we streamline and make as productive as possible the working relationships between our 2 trusts so that we're as streamlined as possible, thinking about how we work strategically with our VCSE partners through the VCSE Alliance here in South West London, and thinking about how we have a more effective mental health planning approach so that we can allocate the resources in the most effective way. We've also included in here a sort of a live example, if you will, at the moment of how we might be able to jointly work around an area that many people are very passionate about, suicide prevention. And so I think that, again, gives you an opportunity to think about how we can bring people together collectively to focus on work that's important for our communities. And finally, the last inclusion is really to say that the Mental Health Provider Collaborative in South West London can neatly, we think, be hosted within our SLP structures, so can report into both our SLP boards, but also up into the South West London ICB. I'll pause there. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Vanessa, did you want to sort of say any concluding remarks? Because I think we can be hugely proud of the South London Partnership and the work that the teams have done across the 3 trusts in working together and driving forward what is, I think, one of the most successful collaboratives in the country. And it has certainly delivered real significant improvements, particularly around the forensics and the more acute end of CAMS, really significant changes. Can I check the other questions, points, observations? I mean, Sarah.
Sorry. The first point was just really to state our appreciation as the voluntary sector in the way we've been able to collaborate with St George's Mental Health Trust and SLUM within this idea of a South West London Providers Collaborative, because it's very refreshing to be involved at such an early stage, and it really will have an impact. I believe we've been looking at different structures where we can put in place to really have a big impact. The second thing also about the commitments that the South West London Mental Health PDG recently made to the voluntary sector. Again, really thankful. It was great to see some commitments like developing a longer-term funding model and also better communication between commissioners and voluntary sector organisations. So these are very good steps, but I hope we can learn from as well in other areas of work. And finally, just wanted to kind of consider the discussion we were having about kind of moving from acute to preventative and maybe moving some of the investment, and I know how difficult it is, into preventative basically over the years, and wanted to check about our discussions around creating a baseline, because obviously if we don't know how much we are contracting within the voluntary sector for mental health, we don't know where we are, so we don't know how much we are improving. So I wanted to check whether there is any movement in that.
Thanks, Sarah. It's a pleasure to work with you guys in the VCSE Alliance. I think we've got some really great work that we can progress and move forward with. Your last point around sort of the baseline, I think it's a really good time to do that now. So I'd expect to have some of that in place before Christmas, because we're about to move into the annual planning round. So actually it's a good time to say, where are we investing at present? What is that investment in? And where might we wish to go in the future? We already have some of that. We already know some of that across our 6 places. We just don't have a fully consistent picture. So we've done some work, some more to do pre-Christmas. Thank you.
Go to Nicola next, please.
Yeah, thank you. So great stuff. It's really important to have our very important organisations working together collaboratively like this. So I'm very supportive of this. But and you've alluded to it in the slides, Amy. But just to make sure that so the focus is currently about the relationships between the providers and how that's optimised, and then you're looking to then look more outwardly. But place is really, really important, and the services we have in the community for most people with mental health. With mental ill health are actually in the community most of the time and not in our institutions, which is as it should be. And so that focus has got to be really a really important part of what you do. And I think it is, but just testing.
So just to respond to that, obviously the outline around the provider collaborative in here is largely focused on those on the relationship between the 2 providers. The partnership delivery group has all places represented in it, and it's a place at which decisions will be made and taken around what service provision looks like, and we remain absolutely committed to that. And as this board has committed to move the investment into mental health as part of the delivery of the South West London strategy, we'll look to ensure that the primary care and indeed the third and voluntary sector are central to making and taking those decisions with us.
Thank you. I'm going to come to John next, but Mike, I'm not sure whether, because there is a very clear interface between mental health and young people, local authorities, particularly young people, but actually across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that the partnership working has strengthened significantly in the last year or so. Some of you may know we had a little awkward patch when it became apparent that the impact of the complex care programme had a significant negative financial impact on local authorities without anyone intending that to be the case. And we've done some great work. The teams have done some great work with Vanessa and a team to look at how we can adjust that programme going forward to make sure that that is something we manage much better going forward. And I think that's just illustrative of how well we're working, particularly with that part of the system at the moment. So very positive as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you, Mike. John.
Chair, look, there's an understandable national and regional focus at the moment on urgent and emergency care, particularly long waiters for a mental health disposition in emergency departments. And that's understandable. It's right that we think about and focus that. But I think it's well worth going back to slide 111, where our colleagues have highlighted a whole range of successes in very complex pathways where they've succeeded as a partnership in delivering change and reducing out of areas, but actually also improving patient and family experience as a consequence of that. And lots of systems have struggled to do this. So I think it's, we shouldn't be embarrassed to celebrate some of the real successes that have taken place, because delivering some of these changes in these incredibly complex services isn't easy. And there's a lot being done. Admittedly, there's more to do, and no one's saying that there isn't. But I think it'd be churlish of me not just to recognise they really have cracked some of the intractable problems. So well done to them.
Thank you. I wonder if we could maybe say a little bit more about the 30-odd% reduction in 136, not least because we know that there is a real drive, and we are very committed as an ICB to reduce the incidence of coercive mental health care.
I can say a little bit about that, Chair. So I'm Jeremy Walsh, I'm the Director of the South London Partnership, and I think this is an example of great collaboration, and in fact collaboration between colleagues at South West London St George's, John representing South London and Maudsley, and actually colleagues at Oxley's, and together we thought about the needs of South Londoners, particularly around these 136, and we've worked together to develop a central hub that responds to the Metropolitan Police whenever and wherever someone is experiencing a mental health crisis in the public. And I think that work that we're doing together and are continuing to work together will drive benefits for South West London. And colleagues actually this week were up in Manchester shortlisted for a HSJ award around the achievements that they've made in this area. And I think we can build on that going forwards.
That's really, really helpful. I've got one question myself. In my regular meetings with Richard Douglas, the chair of South East London ICB, we've discussed, and I think the quartet with the two chief executives alongside the chairs have also discussed mental health in sort of a broad sense, because clearly the South London Partnership covers both of our ICBs, but we both currently have separate mental health strategies, which I know from a SLAM point of view is particularly challenging, as you are in both of those, both of our ICBs. Are there any things that you would want us to be looking at in that space as two ICBs, things which cause frustration?
So I'll come in and then other colleagues might want to join. I mean, it's always tempting to say, why don't we have one strategy for the 12 boroughs? But trying to get to a point of agreement across 6 is quite a challenge, and making sure that we maintain those relationships with local authorities, etc. So there's great alignment between the two strategies. It's how we implement it. I think one of the things that's perhaps most important is, particularly for the work that we've done in children's forensics and eating disorders, is that when the delegation comes down from NHSE to the ICSs, that we continue to work on a South London footprint, because that's how we've been enabled to make and take the savings, so that we don't become parochial to South West and South East London at that stage, which I know is complicated. We would need to work really carefully around it. But I think that could unsettle things in a way that isn't necessary. So if we can maintain that, and I know Sarah and I have had conversations about that previously, but I think the biggest thing that we can also do is share the learning across the two ICSs. We've had many conversations about, should we go to one acute bed base, for example, for working age adults, but with the demand as it is at the moment and the complexities around that, it's felt that shared learning and shared clinical practice is probably better than moving into a mixed organisational structure.
That's really helpful, Vanessa. I'm going to ask, there may be colleagues that would like to come in on that as well, but I'm going to bring Sarah in at this point, because she has regular conversations with Andrew Bland, her opposite number in South East London, and mental health often features in those conversations.
So this is specialised delegation. So luckily we have a South London office of specialised commissioning that we jointly support. But what I would say is that office has actually been focused on the acute trusts and not on mental health. So I think what we will need to do, because I think it's very important where things work well across South London, that we want to keep that, and we've done that particularly around the specialised work. We will be taking some stuff to a South West London level, but a lot of work will be done across South London. So I think when we take that on, I think it needs to be recognised, and I think we need to make sure that that works well for everybody involved. What I would say is, though, it's an opportunity really with the South London Office of Specialised Commissioning, and you'll know that Martin is actually leading that, and actually was the lead, I think, in South East London for mental health some time ago, so we'll know this. It'd be an opportunity, I think, to really kind of expand their work as what we call SLOS, the South London Office of Specialised Commissioning. So I think perhaps we get everyone together to have a chat about that.
Thank you. Can I just come in on the, I guess, the shared opportunities? So we do have two separate strategies, and of course each organisation has its own strategy as well, but actually a lot of the priorities are really similar. we're all facing very similar challenges, and I think the shared learning opportunities are really critical. We have really strong engagement from both ICBs through our SLP programme boards already, so we often share. So just this week we were talking about adult eating disorders, some fantastic work that's going on in the South East London ICB thinking about data that we will seek to learn more about and possibly bring over to South West. So I think those opportunities do exist. Maybe we need to be more explicit about how those joint working relationships operate. I suspect John is probably the best placed person to understand what the challenges might be across the two.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you. So I'm John Northwood. I'm the Operational Director for Croydon at SLAM. Also, thankfully, the Forensic Services and 111 and 136, so uniquely masquerading as Kate today. I can reflect a bit on how that strategy translates into operational delivery, because I'd absolutely agree with Amy that the main thing that I would say from the slightly unique position Croydon sits in is that, yes, we have trust strategy, cell strategy and South West London strategy, but there is an enormous amount of overlap because the challenge is so similar, and obviously the minds in each of those rooms are the very best that we've got to come up with how we assess the problem. So I think I could say with a great deal of assurance that when we work across strategy, it works almost harmoniously the majority of the time. My only thought would be around just a little bit more synchronisation of timing, I suppose, is one of the things that the organisations would work with. But that's a minor detail. I think in general it actually, in a complex matrix, works quite well.
I think that's really helpful. Certainly, Richard was going to write a letter about the collaborative, and we then realised actually this might be something which would be better done jointly rather than as individual ICBs. So I think we're learning. We're happy to have any of that feedback. If there are things which we could be doing collectively together better to support you, do let us know, because we'll be happy to do that. But we'll certainly take that back in terms of making sure that any requests, demands or other unusual items, we try and make them at the same time rather than separately. I think the other thing, just sort of in concluding this, Vanessa touched upon it, there is a commitment from South West London to shift current resources out of our physical acute services into mental health. The problem is common across the whole of South London, where all of South London actually spends disproportionately less money on mental health than other parts of the country. That's recognised by both ICBs. That said, we have financial challenges at present, but we have got a long-term aim towards that. And I know it may not have been explicit from the South East London ICB yet, but the conversations that Sarah and I have had with Andrew and with Richard would reflect that position as well. So I hope that's a sort of positive note to conclude on. Okay, thank you very much. We are actually on time on the agenda, and this is the bit of the agenda that everybody has been waiting for with bated breath. Ben, you're going to talk to us about the amendments to the ICB Constitution.
You stole my thunder, Mike. I was going to say this is the highlight of the papers today, so I'm going to make sure that I cover all of the detail at length. As I think the board will now be getting used to, we are periodically asked by NHS England to update our constitution. As some of you may remember from the formation of the ICB, NHS England provided us with a model stock constitution and statutory guidance to follow, and all ICBs are expected to follow this constitution with some ability for local adaptation to that. So I think this is at least the second update to the Constitution we've had, if not the third. The main changes are outlined in the cover paper, but just to recap quickly, the main ones are that Mike is now required to appoint a deputy chair for the board. That is from the members that we've already got from the non-executive members, so it's not an additional appointment. We are also required to make one of those non-executive a senior non-executive member. For those in other organisations, that's equivalent to a senior independent director. There's been some clarification around the length of term of office that non-execs can hold. updating other passages around PSR. So when we originally put in the Constitution, this wasn't law at the point, so we've just updated that to reflect how we are compliant with the legislation. And it's removed some outdated passages around the creation of the ICB as well. So attached with the cover paper is a PowerPoint table giving you all of the detail of the changes, so should you want to peruse it, and there's a full copy of the Constitution there as well. I'm really happy to take any questions, but obviously the board is being asked to approve these changes for their submission to NHS England, who give us the final approval on the Constitution.
Thank you for that, Ben. You made it as painless as possible. Are people content with the changes that are proposed? Thank you for that. We'll be coming forward at future meetings. As you know, we've been going through a recruitment process for non-executive members. We'll be coming forward with proposals in relation to both the deputy chair and the senior non-executive member. So that will be at future meetings. And of course, you'll be pleased to know that you will have me as the chair until May 2028, unless the Secretary of State at any moment decides that he or she, because it may be a she in the future, doesn't want me to do it, in which case I'm instantly out. So there you go. Thank you all very much. We have come to the break, so we'll be breaking until 3:45. So 10-15 minute break. You're all very, very good at timekeeping. Thank you very much. We are back for the second half of our ICB board meeting in public. We're going to go straight to agenda item number 7, and really pleased to welcome James Moore from NHS and George Lee from the GLA, who are going to work with Helen in presenting this plan, which is this item, which is an update on our green plan. So, Helen, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So every 6 months we've been bringing an update to the Green Plan of all the successes that we've had across South West London and where we're continuing to plan and go. And so I just wanted to give you a quick update on that before we hand it over to our guest, kindly agreed to come today, around the London Climate Resilience Review that was published in July and what that means for health. So I think over the last 6 months we've done some excellent work, really working closely with partners across the system, improving and strengthening our work with the local authorities, including about developing our communications around clean air as we go forward. Really pleased to say that we've recruited 3 GP sustainability fellows to really start spreading the word across primary care and to develop that further, and that we've managed to attract expert speakers into forums for us, and we will continue to do that as we go forward. I think we've had some real success in starting to bring in some grants and look at funding from elsewhere to be able to develop and improve our buildings, such as the 1.1 million grant to Kingston Hospital to install LED lighting, and we'll continue to do that and to look for other opportunities where funding is available to help support and drive things forwards. And walking aid recycling is a really big part of the London programme, and Epsom and Helier have managed to introduce that into where they are. So again, we're aligning to what London is doing and where we are going. I think some of the other things that was really important last time that we talked about at both the Finance and Planning Committee but also here at the board was how do we actually capture what we've done and the impact that it's having. So we've continued to push ahead with our work stream about what do those KPIs look like and how do we calculate what we do. And RMH have got a smart carbon dashboard that we're looking at and working with to see how we could use that across the system. But we've tried to look at what we've done here, and we can't count the carbon reductions from the initiatives on everything at the moment, but for the ones that we can and where we are, we know that these initiatives that we're putting in place in now would save 3,641 metric tonnes of carbon dioxide emissions. That's equivalent to 8.5 million miles in a car, or 1.7 million litres of petrol, or even 550 homes being heated for the year. and I love my AI tool. So I think there's some really exciting stuff though as we go and we continue to build on what we're doing here and to take things forward. And we're going to continue to focus on how we get the agenda across the patients and the population and our staff to champion as we go forward. Continue to work really closely with the GLA about how do we get the risk assessments in place around adaptation, and then we want to really continue to work with the local authorities of public health primary care to develop things and be able to count even better and understand the impacts of what we are having. In the next 6 months we'll also be looking to refresh for the next 3 years, and so we'd welcome your thoughts on what you would want to see in that plan as we go forward before we start working with everybody else and working together to develop the plan. But in that note I will hand over to James.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having us here today. I think the first thing... Is my button? There we go. Thank you very much, and thank you for having us here today. I think the first thing I'd like to say is, again, a thank you to your team in terms of how well you've been working with the NHS England team, who sits under my responsibility. I'm James Moore, Director of Improvement for London. I'm responsible for elective cancer diagnostics and the sustainability piece, and it's great we've got engagement from your team in the work in this sphere. The other thing I'd like to call out is this report we're here to talk about today, which is all about how we become more resilient as an NHS, and we've all seen the challenges that over the last few years. I think there's some really good examples in the report, and George, who's one of the co-authors of the report, will be able to talk through some of the specifics there. Now, you will have seen, those of you who've got into the detail, that there are some specific asks put on the health service as part of the outcome of this. One is around risk management, so identifying risk. Now, a lot of those risks we may well already have identified, and it may just be that the risk is increasing, but we've already got a business continuity plan for it. Or it might be that actually we need a new plan in some areas. So there's a requirement for us to collectively to find a way to get under the skin of that. And then the second part of it is about, well, what do we do with that? What's our plan for the future? We know nationally that the National Greener team is coming up with a process that sits slightly outside of the time frame of the Green Plan Refresh, which we're trying to join up, so we're not doing things more than once or in many different ways. We also know that a lot of what we'll need to do will also depend on partner agencies. So if I think about one of the trusts I know, not in this patch, so Northwood Park in northwest London, it's over the last few years, a few times the roundabout by the hospital has flooded, which then has an impact on access to the hospital. There may not be a huge amount the hospital can do about that, but clearly working with partner agencies, there are things that can be done. Needless to say, there's all the challenges we already have. Our infrastructure is already ageing. We don't have any extra money for this. So the question is, how do we organise ourselves? Because this is not a new thing. It's a risk that we already have. And the question is then, how do we manage that risk with what we have? So my plea to you, which perhaps we'll come to at the end, is as we look to build a bit of a programme around this, using all the existing systems we already have, because we want to minimise duplication, what was it you would like to see as part of that, and how would you wish to engage with that? I'll pass to George now to talk through the report to help with that. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me. In 2021, London was hit by 2 extreme rainstorms. Some parts of the city received more than twice the average of July rainfall in 2 hours. In 2022, temperatures reached 40 degrees. During that heat wave, the London Fire Brigade experienced its busiest day since the Second World War. Operations were cancelled at Guy's and Tommy's when IT servers failed in the heat. The price of energy surged as power supply struggled to meet demand. The East Coast Main Line was disconnected from King's Cross as train lines buckled. And these 2 weather events were instrumental in the Mayor of London's decision to commission the London Climate Resilience Review, an independent review that was chaired by Emma Howard-Boyd, a former chair of the Environment Agency, and I was lucky to work on that with my colleague Johanna Sutton. London's a city of 9 million people and more. We spoke to individuals, communities, organisations, including many in the NHS, Transport for London, the London Fire Brigade, the Met, businesses, UK government, I could go on, representatives of vulnerable groups. We made 50 recommendations to guide London's preparations for floods, as well as heat waves, droughts, wildfires, sea level rise, and other climate risks. Everything in our report, I would argue, is relevant to Londoners' health. As Emma said at the launch, the health and security of Londoners and the health of the national economy are inseparable. But we decided to include a specific chapter on London's healthcare sector because we received a huge amount of feedback and evidence talking about direct threats to people's health, the performance and operations of healthcare systems, and the climate resilience of NHS estates. I expect a lot of what I'm about to say is quite familiar to you. Climate impacts are already disrupting healthcare in England. Attempts to address this are often sidelined by immediate pressures in the sector, such as the need for acute care, the elective surgery backlog, industrial action, general lack of awareness and strategic oversight of how local authorities and the NHS could be working better together. The government's plan for adaptation talks about incorporating climate adaptation into green plans in 2027, and significant resource constraints. Lord Darzai said last week that the backlog maintenance bill now stands at more than 11.6 billion. Senior NHS staff told the review it's really hard to spend NHS money on that because someone will say that's 15 nurses or 12 neonatal intensive care unit costs, or why has my aunt not had her hip replaced? Wetter weather increases wear and tear to hospitals and stops patients attending appointments due to transport disruption. We've just heard about that roundabout. During the floods in 2021 at Whipps Cross, 100 inpatients had to be moved and ambulances were diverted. We were told by one person in the NHS we had to evacuate over 100 inpatients who were in beds because of a flood in East London over 2 years ago. And if you've ever thought about moving one patient from one ward to another, that's 2 porters and a nurse moving 100 beds. That causes huge system disruption, and we don't have 100 spare beds anywhere. Adapting London's healthcare settings to climate change is an NHS-wide problem, not just in London. There is lack of capacity and skills to respond to increasingly severe impacts through building design, maintenance, retrofit, and with green infrastructure. One of our recommendations is that the Mayor could act as a convener to improve mutual understanding of what London's priorities are for managing the health effects of climate change and preparing the health sector for more acute and chronic impacts. The Mayor could work with the London Health Board to mainstream adaptation action by ensuring that mitigation and adaptation are included in any future London health and care vision or strategy, and by considering adapting in its meetings in 2024, 2025 and beyond. The new nature and scale of the impacts is a key challenge. There were 3,271 heat-related deaths in England in 2022. Saving lives is always the #1 priority, but mortality statistics don't tell the whole story. The population density of cities and the many people with different vulnerabilities and exposures in urban areas means the health effects of climate events present significant challenge to the capacity of the system itself. In June 2023, the London Ambulance Service received 7,751 999 calls in one day, the highest since the peak of the pandemic, as hot weather, thunderstorms, pollen count, and pollution caused a spike in people experiencing breathing difficulties. At this point, I'd like to say that we heard very good things about emergency response in the NHS, but that is different to climate adaptation. There needs to be a decoupling of adaptation and emergency preparedness, resilience and response to ensure that organisations can prioritise and address both. It would be expected that EPRR teams would have expertise that can contribute to the development and delivery of adaptation planning, but chronic risks can't sit with that service because they require strategic policy action across the broader system. UK government and the Mayor should work to reduce reliance on emergency response mechanisms, and I'd like to add that this isn't unique to the NHS. You hear the same thing from the London Fire Brigade, to adapt to climate impacts by reducing exposure and vulnerability to them. Making the investment case for dealing with these impacts is a challenge that spans every government department. The report Barriers to Financing Adaptation Actions in the UK for the Climate Change Committee said future investment is dependent on willingness to pay, which is affected strongly by the level of awareness, understanding and engagement with issues. However, the National Audit Office said that government cannot provide an estimate of how much it spends to manage the risks of droughts, high temperatures and heat waves, surface water flooding and storms, because action is taken by a wide range of government departments and agencies, and no one collects this information. In the review, we made several recommendations to address this. For instance, that the UK government should appoint a Cabinet Office Minister for Adaptation and Resilience, and that government updates resilience and technical standards above and beyond the minimum projected rise in global temperatures, because many current standards and design codes rely on data for previous extremes, when really we should be building in resilience for what happens next. Unfortunately, and I have to say this, the previous government's plan to adapt, published last year, does not do enough to prepare for climate impacts, even as they are experienced now. Every year missed makes these challenges harder to address. The new government should clearly define its policy ambitions and draft new legislation, including standards for homes, buildings, and infrastructure. Today, I've spoken about a few key challenges in addressing climate impacts to health and the built environment, and these include prioritization of acute over chronic risks, lack of awareness about adaptation in general, the inequality of vulnerabilities, resource constraints, historic lack of maintenance, cascading risks through interdependent systems, the growing scale of climate impacts, and a lack of join-up at a higher strategic policy level. Creating standards for the future and improving the evidence base for investment will help those working in healthcare to incorporate adaptation and resilience into plans, ensuring it's not just a nice to have, but makes communities, homes, and infrastructure, including hospitals, more resilient. And before I finish, I'd like to say on the 7th of October, the chair of our review, Emma, will be speaking at a Wellcome Trust and Green Alliance Health and Climate Conference alongside members of the government about these issues. Thank you very much.
George, thank you. And thank you, James, as well. So I think that that's helpful. I think the paper gives us some clear pointers to some of our priorities. Can we first of all just note the progress that we've made on the current 2-year plan? And also, I think that I've benefited from being at a number of meetings where we've discussed the London Climate Resilience Review. I think the most important thing is how we use the evidence within that to inform our 25-28 programme of work, and I think and how we build upon the success in of the current Green Plan. Clearly, we do have a model site in southwest London with Springfield. So, Vanessa, I'm sure that you'd be willing to, you and your team would be willing to share expertise and experience on how you can actually create a truly sustainable environment, which is aligned with our Green Plan, but also contributes so much to community resilience as well. In terms of some of the priorities moving forward for the 25-28, I think that the current plan, I understand why, but is quite focused upon the acute sector. Perhaps we don't include the mental health sector because you've already cracked it, but actually it's not just our hospitals, it's our primary care estate. And we need to be making sure that we're securing resource in order that we can invest in the primary care estate. I don't think we say enough at present about estate resilience in relation to extreme weather, which we know is going to be significantly impactful. If I go around any of our hospitals, pretty much any of our hospitals, on a very hot summer's day, I would not want to be a patient in any of those wards. They struggle to be at a tolerable heat. We may again have some. I suspect that some of the estate that I've seen at Marsden actually is really high quality and actually does capture that. So we've got areas of expertise and best practice that we could and should be drawing upon within that. I'm not convinced that we've done enough around things like single-use medicines. And trying to phase those out. I think we've done some really great work around noxious gases, etc. But I think there's more that we could and should be moving forward with. I'm not sure that our trusts who operate car purchase schemes have looked at those in relation to promoting electric vehicles, or have made that feel like a viable option for their staff by installing sufficient charging points in staff car parks. So there's a whole range of things that I think we could and should be looking at in that space. I think there's, what we don't talk about much is the place of care. So where we deliver our outpatient appointments, which currently is our central acute sites rather than close to home. So again, we should be wrapping that aspiration in to our green agenda, and we should be making sure that wherever possible, any visit to a hospital is a one-stop shop as opposed to repeated visits for different tests, etc. That said, I'm also really excited by the things that GST have piloted successfully drone technology for pathology, which is using renewable technology, cheap to do, and actually is delivering at a speed, an unprecedented speed. Instead of it being 2 hours to cross parts of southeast London, it's doable within about 10 minutes, which is just amazing if you want to get quick results. So again, there are possibilities like that we could and should be exploring. So I think we'll probably, as we come closer to the start of 2025 and the new programme, we will probably want to have a seminar with some experts' opinion to support and guide us in that space. We would welcome the contributions of our colleagues at the GLA and actually indeed elsewhere in the NHS in London and elsewhere. Would any colleagues like to make any further comments in this space? Sarah?
So yeah, firstly, can I just start by saying thank you to the team and the teams across South West London, because I think actually we have progressed quite well on the green agenda in South West London. And I think that the work that's going on is really positive, and we've got some best practice. We've got, as you mentioned, the fantastic facilities at Springfield, but we also have some really difficult infrastructure issues across South West London. And I don't think that we can talk about this agenda without talking about investment in infrastructure, which I think is a major issue for the NHS as a whole, as we know, but also particularly in South West London, because we have some of the oldest buildings in the NHS in South West London. You can't deliver some of this, and as we know, we don't hold that money. That's held nationally by the Department of Health and by the government. So, you know, it's been pointed out in Darcy that the underinvestment in infrastructure in the NHS has caused us to be less productive, but it's also caused us to be less green, I think, and less sustainable. And therefore, that kind of investment that needs to come into the NHS, and that's in primary care as well, is key to us being able to deliver on the sustainability agenda. So I think it's great that the GLA are doing this work, but I think in order for us in the NHS to deliver it, I don't think there's any sense of us not wanting to do this. It's the ability, based on our infrastructure and capital, that we just don't have in some instances that allows us to do it. But I think what our plan shows is that we've done absolutely the best we possibly can with the infrastructure and capital that we have, and where we have had investment, such as at Springfield, it's made a massive difference. It just goes to show you what you can do when you put the investment in the right place. Actually, those are the kind of things that I think the learning from the way in which we work in the NHS is not just about being more productive, because we know putting money into infrastructure means we are more productive, but also it means that we can start to deliver on some of these really important agendas as well. So there you go, I'll get off my soapbox now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. Vanessa?
So one of the things that we did with Springfield, it was a unique opportunity, but was that every decision we made had dual purposes, because you can choose to, I don't know, have light, bright buildings, but you could also choose to make them much greener, can't you, with that? And I do wonder if there is work that we can do with the GLA to one, use it as a case study for how you make and take decisions, because it doesn't. Some of the decisions we made didn't cost us any more. We just did things differently because we had the right expertise and advice, and we were in the right place at the right time. So I wonder wonder if GLA colleagues wanted to do some joint work with us to promote some of that, but also to help other people make those decisions. Because if you're doing a car park up, it doesn't cost that much to pop in a couple of extra, so there's all those types of things that you can do that you wouldn't order. It's not core NHS business, I guess, and that's what I've learned.
So I'll take that back. I mean, I think that is absolutely core to our recommendations here to the Mayor and to others, is how do we work together to learn how to do it, bearing in mind that the money isn't necessarily going to be turned on immediately. So, what can we learn from each other? And that's best practice and worst practice, I would suggest.
Callie.
Thanks, Mike. I was just going to say that, sort of bring it back to sort of local level for the ICB. The thing that I've learned is how very important this agenda is for staff working in the health service. So I just wonder if there's more we can be doing to share what's going on across our ICB patch, how it aligns with work across London and beyond. I think it's more important to staff than I had understood. And when we were developing our recent strategy at the Royal Marsden, this came up in every single one of the 40 groups of clinical teams. So I just think there's something we can be doing about, showing what we're doing to our staff and then thinking about how we prioritise investment as it becomes available. I think that'd be really helpful.
I mean, that's really, really helpful, Callie. So, Joe.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just echo what Callie said. So in my conversations with staff, they're really passionate about this and they've got some great ideas as well. So I wondered, how do we go about activating our staff and then harnessing their ideas? We've got a couple of junior doctors that our charity are actually funding as sort of green champions who've got a whole bunch of really good ideas that we're trying to bring to the fore. But, to Callie's point, this is on everyone's mind and they want to do something about it. I think, to your point, Mike, there is absolutely something about our behaviour and how we deliver our services, and it's certainly a mission in our green plan locally that we don't really contemplate how we could deliver services differently in a different setting, cut down on journey times, number of appointments, all of that sort of stuff. So I think that needs to be front and centre in it too. And then the other thing that I'm going to make sure that we do is we sort of formally consider our estate from a climate resilience perspective. We might do a risk assessment around business continuity and that might inform our capital plan, but are we properly thinking about, to some of the points that George has raised, are we looking at it through the lens of climate resilience? And I think we all need to be doing that if we're not already.
Really helpful, Joe. Yeah. Nicola.
I thought you weren't going to speak.
Yeah, no, I am now. So, and just to, it's a bit loud, sort of continuing the theme really, but also, on a very micro level, with our estate and our businesses in general practice, in dentistry, in optoms and pharmacy. So that's a whole load of estate, isn't it? But actually, there's a whole load of people working in those environments. And I think that's probably got to be the way that we approach this, because people feel quite helpless about what they can do given the money situation. That feels really hard at the moment, I think. And so I'm really pleased to hear about your GP champions. Send them my way, because I think there's some really good stuff we can do to just help people to think about this. But it is really hard in primary care to think about what you can do, and there's a cultural shift that we need to support people to go on here, and I think that is really important. But there's also some of the formal stuff, isn't there? So having proposals and business cases and the stuff that we look at all the time to make sure we do the equality impact assessments, and we've got all these things that we standardise in the approach that we take, and I know we've got the kind of green bit on there, but I think we should make more of that to make sure that when we're considering proposals for digital systems and the impact that changes in outpatients will have, or in general practice, and sometimes patients aren't always on board with it, and we can, I think, find better ways to engage them when we flag this as well, because the public are very keen on seeing us do this. So I think there is a big cultural shift that we have to take here.
Really helpful. I think we probably need to think about, as we're looking to develop the 25-28 plan, how we actually engage those different components of primary care moving forward. So Mark, Charlotte, Sarah, and then John, and then we'll need to move on. So
So I suppose mine's just an offer of support, because I think just you mentioned about local authorities and about public health, and actually they sit around place committees, and actually I think police could be a real support in developing some of this locally.
Thanks, Mark. Charlotte.
Yeah, no, just to echo what Callie said, so that's what we hear from Trust Comms directors and from local authority communications leads, is frontline staff and grassroots staff are really, really interested, and it's easy to energise and engage people. But I'm probably stealing Sarah's thunder here as well, but our community groups as well. So we've got a lot of environmental community groups, and we've had a conversation just on the, the back of this presentation around we need to get out and say more about what we're doing, because our trusts in particular are doing really good work, and Sarah and I don't think that our communities know enough about that. So I think, one of the main things we need is hope. And yes, we can do things without lots and lots of money and huge investment. We can still deliver things. So I think it's a communications challenge, which I will talk to local authority and Trust Comms leads about, and use the connections that Sarah has got.
Thank you. Yes, we were chatting about, the amazing media progress update and how there are several voluntary sector groups that are environmental groups that would be interested in knowing you're doing, such progress, and also an offer for the 25-28, plan. We can definitely put you in contact with local groups that would be willing to participate. Actually, I did pass on the presentation to the Croydon Green Network, which kind of brings together a couple of local environmental groups like Croydon Climate Change and Croydon Climate Action, Sustainable Thornton-Heath, and they came back immediately with their comments saying how they were glad to see a plan to include scope-free emissions, which are the largest and hardest to measure. And then the link to the Mayor's climate resilience emissions as well. They really welcomed that. And one of the things that they asked me to pass on is as well this question around, and this seems to be my favorite word today, baseline. See if there is a baseline for carbon emissions measurement, because they feel that without knowing what the baseline is, you can't plan to get net zero basically, and you can't track progress. So that question they asked me to pass on was whether there was a baseline for carbon emissions.
Helen, do you want to answer?
Yeah, so within the original plan, it states the baseline in there, so I can share that back with you. And thank you for your kind offer and putting us in touch. I think that would be really helpful. And we're just trying to spread the word, as you say, and use the power of the staff and everybody that's part of the NHS and the wider partnership that we're here to do that. I think also just to add, doing the infrastructure strategy this year has really helped us really understand more about our estate, especially in primary care, to be able to help us to do this and build on this. And what was really important when we were doing the infrastructure strategy is that we really made sustainability a key theme of it. I think more so than maybe other areas have done because of the timing of when we produced it and how much work we were doing in here in parallel. And so I think it's actually how for both of those we make sure that we can drive and deliver change and make sure that we have the estate and the infrastructure that we need as we go forward, so it is resilient. I'm now going to worry about roundabouts everywhere I go.
Thank you for that. John.
Chair, thank you. I think one of the learnings from the COVID inquiry is that we weren't ready. And some of the excuses are that we weren't aware, or possibly we just didn't get it. I think when it comes to climate change and resilience, we are aware. I think we do get it. But it's a moot point as to whether we're ready or not. And I think we've had honest conversations here related to our capital backlog, particularly in South West London, and some of the challenges that we'll face. And I think we are doing things in that which is helpful. But just thinking back to clean air, we've had a long conversation on the board today about our urgent and emergency care plan and the pressures that come onto our system. It's crystal clear that if we improve the air quality in London, we will have less pressures, particularly from respiratory diseases in the height of winter. And just to say to those people who felt that ULEZ was the wrong thing to do for a whole load of wrong reasons, that hopefully we will see the evidence over the next 18 months that pursuit of schemes such as ULEZ is the right thing to do, because actually those are the things which will not just protect individuals but our wider population too. Sorry, it's a bit of a soapbox, but I think we need to sort of challenge some of this sort of climate denial stuff that is going on and the libertarian view of the world, because it's just not helpful when you're trying to run a system which is struggling with some of the challenges.
John, thank you for that. We note the progress made to date. We note the work of the London Climate Resilience Review and welcome the contribution that makes to the development of our future planning. Right at the heart of our future planning, I think that Callie's point is really important. We have a huge asset base in the enthusiasm of our staff. We need to make sure as we move forward we really capture that. So, I mean, Helen, that's a challenge for you. That's a challenge for Charlotte in terms of making sure that we can support our trusts to galvanise. Thank you for your contributions today. As you can see, it actually provoked a lively debate which has run significantly over time. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yep, fine. Thank you for that, Wendy. We'll now move on to the mission board.
So, thank you, Chair. I'll try and be brief. So, bringing this short paper for note, you'll be aware that we've got a financial challenge in South West London, and we've had a Finance and Recovery Board for some time now. And what we are trying to do now is to build on that and the work that's already happened and align with the new government 10-year plan and the missions by the new government around how we might take forward work. So what we're doing is we're bringing in the work of financial recovery and transformation together in a new missions board. Yourself, Chair, you will be chairing this board, and what we will be doing is bringing back regular reports to this meeting, but it doesn't cut across the work of the existing committees of the board, so there will still be a link through to quality and oversight and finance committees. This will not do all of the work around transformation. We will be engaging with the public around the transformation work stream. So this is an oversight board that will actually just make sure that we are on track and keep us all sort of focused in the right way. So that's the plan. I won't go into the detail because it's in a very short paper. I'm hoping everyone's had time to read it. So this is just for noting for the board. And we hope to have the new board up and running in October.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Sarah. Any questions? We'll clearly be coming back to the board with regular updates. Ben, Board Assurance Framework.
Thank you, Mike. So it's always a challenge to present these papers and keep the board's interest. So today I thought I'd do it through the power of interpretive dance. The Board Assurance Framework provides an overview of the organisation's highest scoring risks, as well as those which we believe are either growing in significance or that may pose a risk to the delivery of our objectives in key areas. As you will note, the BAF is currently made up of 7 risks. All of these risks have been recently reviewed as part of our regular cycles, and the key changes are noted in the covering paper, and we had a detailed conversation about this at SMT a couple of weeks ago. Due to the tight agenda, I've had to reduce the amount of time we spend on the BAF at this meeting. However, if any of the board members do have any questions or comments, I'd be really happy to take them out of the meeting, and I know that the ED owners of the risk would also be happy to discuss those outside if necessary. And I just wanted to add, we're coming up to our next audit and risk committee, which regularly reviews the BAF and all the risks on there. As I think I've mentioned before, and Martin has, we have a deep dive on each of the BAF risks in cycle through that. And at the next meeting, we're going to be looking at the cyber risk in detail. So this is for noting, Mike, and obviously happy to make any questions.
Thank you. And as I say, I would normally go to Martin at this point, but he's given his apologies. So I think it's appropriate to keep this relatively short, but are there any questions on the board assurance framework? Vanessa, thank you.
Sorry, I was just thinking in light of the conversation we've had earlier today and the board's risk appetite and how we make effective use of the board risk appetite. So we've had clear statements today that some of our ED departments aren't fit for purpose, that impacts on patient quality, that our finances are at risk. So balancing the finance risk, the workforce risk, and performance and quality, and adding those all up together and having effectively low thresholds for all of them, that makes our risk appetite really difficult to live with, doesn't it? It would be helpful to think as a board about which ones of those we're more willing to compromise on than others. I think it's explicit or implicit in what the work that we're doing, but I wonder how we're doing work in the trust at trying to bring it more to the fore and more lively, because what we're asking our staff to do is pretty impossible, and therefore there's something about how do we make it become less of a flat document and more of a live one. That's not necessarily, but I think it's a challenge for us as a board.
Shall I just a couple of things that we're doing, Vanessa, and I promise that wasn't a sort of staged question. So throughout the organisation, our risk manager engages our staff and is doing awareness and engagement exercises with all of our staff about sort of raising the profile of risks so that we can have a proper discussion around that. Martin, as I think he said before in this meeting, is a great advocate for talking about risk appetite and tolerance. We're going to have a further discussion at, I think possibly at the next committee actually, about appetite and tolerance. We've been working with RSM, who are internal auditors, on this to try and get some best practice. They do have a very good risk manager who has presented to other NHS organisations and ICBs about how you can start to discuss and wrap in appetite and tolerance to the board framework. And the plan is that we'll bring that back to a future seminar where we can have a discussion as a board.
I think that would be helpful, Ben. I mean, I look at some of these things and they don't actually read as risks to me because they should be on an issues log because they're already happening. Particularly if I look at urgent and emergency care and reflect upon our earlier conversation, the risk is written as something that might happen. We're actually living with it now. So it does feel that we ought to perhaps reflect that in that discussion. Joe, did I see you?
Yeah, I was just reflecting on the conversation that we've just had about climate resilience and the threat that that poses to us, and whether that's also something that we ought to reflect on. It might be to emphasise it more in one of the risks that's already here, or bring out something specifically.
I think that's helpful. Would you take that back to the... Yeah, thank you. We'll go on to board committee report and updates. Clearly, a couple of our non-executive members have moved on and we haven't yet replaced them. So I'm going to ask for Helen and then Jonathan to give very brief updates from the Finance and Planning Committee meeting.
Thank you, Chair. So at the Finance and Planning Committee, we effectively focused on winter, which is the discussion we've had here today, as well as reviewing the financial position and our plans and savings plans as we go forwards. So I think we've covered most of that here today already. I'm happy to do the update to the month 4 finance report, if that would help.
If you would, please, Karen. Yeah. Thank you.
So if you can see from the paper, which I'll take as read, that actually the ICB is on plan with a year-to-date £500,000 surplus and on plan to deliver the £3 million surplus that we agreed during the planning round. It's continuing to make its savings and deliver those. However, there is about £9 million of non-recurrent savings that have been made in year. So what we're trying to do is work through how we find additional recurrent savings so that we know that we are in a better position for next year, because we don't want the size of the challenge for future years to continue to grow. If we look at the wider NHS system, at month 4, the position is £7.3 million adverse to plan. That is being driven by industrial action costs and loss of income, and also cyber attack costs and loss of income, and some RMH income relating to paediatrics that we're negotiating with NHS England. We continue to work together on delivering the savings plans. We have actually delivered savings year to date, but again, there's a switch between recurrent to non-recurrent that we need to work on, because that obviously makes it more difficult for us as we go forwards, with the main risks being around the delivery of that savings programme, the additional inflationary pressures we've seen outside of the plan, and the delivery of additional ERF to be able to secure up what we're doing, recognising the performance we have and the level of non-elective care that and length of stay that we have at the moment, and how we continue to try and address that. On the workforce, which obviously is a key area of focus, you can see through the plans that we are below the agency cap, and we've done significant work as a system, and all the trusts have had real success in ensuring that we've moved to bank and bank to substantive to be able to secure our workforce. So that has reduced down, but it hasn't reduced down to the level we were hoping to have, which was below the cap. We can also see a reduction in totality of the workforce, but actually not to the level of the plan that was there at the time. And again, that remains a key focus for us as we go forwards. Our capital plan is behind spend at the moment. We are still working through the detail of the implications of the reduction of the £10 million that happened during the planning round, and we'll hope to bring that back to you next time as we go forwards. And we're still waiting to hear back on the national future hospitals programmes and the impact of that as we go forwards, and some other national decisions that have been made about national capital allocations. But I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. That was a good whistle-stop tour. There are papers in detail on this, and the Finance Committee will be sitting between now and the next board meeting to fully scrutinise the current position. Plus, it's supported by the Financial Recovery Board, which is sitting at the end of this month, and whose work will morph into the wider mission board as set out by Sarah. But any questions are welcome. Jonathan, performance.
In terms of the quality and performance.
Sorry, yes. Let me go to Mercy first, then I'll go to Elaine, and then I will go to you, Jonathan.
I'm quite happy for you to go to Elaine and Jonathan, but...
on song today.
Yeah, I'll just do a few introductory notes about. We met, Quality and Performance Oversight Committee met on the 14th of August, and obviously we covered performance and quality reports and what's going on. We particularly looked at urgent and emergency care this time, and obviously it's outlined in the report, but I just wanted to say we did particular deep dives into what's happening around gynecological elective recovery, and kind of also link that to the women's health work that we focused on at our last board meeting. So that was quite interesting to actually bring the two together. Also wanted to say that we looked at mortality deep dive across South West London. I think this is the first time we've brought all those kind of information and data together. So it was quite an interesting report to go into. At that point, I think I'm going to cross over to Elaine and Jonathan for further insight into those issues.
Thank you, Mercy. I think just building on the mortality deep dive we've done, it's the first time we've done a system-wide mortality on the back of Lucy Letby, and to test our assurances in terms of work with the Trust for Mortality. And we were first up to NHS England and got commended on our report and the work that we're doing and that shared learning across South West London, which is very positive. I think we've talked a lot about urgent and emergency care today. We did, and at the committee, and it's in the report and lots of that data, so I'll move on from that. Of course, we did have a lot of discussion about 72-hour waits and mental health patients in emergency departments, which is an ongoing piece of work that we're working on. I think the committee heard from the continuing healthcare team, which has been focus of attention and indeed concern across South West London over previous years. and we had a deep dive and a real presentation in terms of the improvements that are being made in terms of the KPIs, the finance and the quality for CHC across South West London, which was helpful, and recognised that NHS England are noticing some of the improvements that we're making with that service, but that was quite an in-depth conversation. We noted some increase in never events at one of our trusts, and they have undertaken or are undertaking some external review about that in a particular specialty, and that report and sharing will come back. I think that that's probably it, taken time. But I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you. Any questions for Elaine?
Sorry, Elaine. I was just a bit worried about the sort of earlier report, and I wasn't sure whether you covered it off. So the first report just talked about elevated mortality at Epsom and St Helier Trust, and the suggestion that that's a data issue, and I just wondered what the timeline was, or whether you meant that had now been resolved. So there's a reference to increased mortality, which may be a data or recording issue, but there isn't a timeline for knowing as a board what that's about. But maybe you covered that, Elaine, but I wasn't sure. And obviously when people talk about increased mortality and
so that's part of the of the deep dive. The trust have been doing and are continuing to do some in-depth work in terms of that data, in terms of where there's concerns about the data, or where there are some issues with an increase in mortality in particular areas of the trust, and they're doing some further work on that, which we'll bring back through committee.
Do you think we ought to set a timeline? Because it's, I don't know how big a problem it is, and we don't know the cause of it, and whether it's a real problem to be concerned about or simply a data problem. But I'm slightly worried there isn't a timeline to learn about that as a board, having put that into a board paper.
It's in particular specialties within the trust, and the trust are doing some work. Reasonably, we'll bring something back to the next board.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Carly. Thank you, Elaine. Jonathan, now it's your turn.
Thank you so much. Well, I've spoken a lot, Chair, today. So, and I think, to be fair, Mercy and Elaine have gratefully covered most of the issues I'd want to draw out. And of course, again, I'm very happy to take any questions that people have. The one that I probably would want to mention is the intention set through our operating plan nationally was to eliminate all 65-week waiters for patients by the end of this month. Whilst we're in a much better position than the rest of London by between a factor of 4 and a factor of 10, depending on which ICB we're talking about, we will not eliminate all 65-week waiters, and we're working closely with the trusts, and that's part of why, just to set the context of Mercy's comment about a deep dive into gynaecology, because a significant number of those patients are in that specialty, are one of our providers. So we're still in a good place comparatively, but not quite where we intended to be. So I thought it important to flag as part of our submissions that we'll be making in the next week or two around our elective care position as a system. Thank you.
Jonathan, thank you for that. As you know, Sarah, yourself and myself have a meeting with the Acute Provider Collaborative. It would be useful if we can pursue that particular item with the APC on the 1st or 2nd of October.
Can I just say something?
Sarah, yeah.
So even though, so there is a significant problem in that particular specialty, but even if you look at the numbers, I think we're still, as South West London, we're still in a very, very good position in comparison to the national. So it's a large number. When I say a large number, it's in the hundreds rather than in the thousands. So it's a small number in comparison to others, but it's still, for us, it's a significant number, and we want to make sure that we deal with that. So we are having discussions across the system and across the providers on that and how we deal with that. But I should also point out that actually, our intent had been to have 0. That was our intent. We will have some hundreds, not thousands, just to be clear.
So maybe I wasn't completely clear, but just to be clear, we're the smallest by, as I say, a factor of 4 in comparison with other London systems, and some London systems are a factor of 10 bigger than ours. So, so if we were to have 100, they would have 1,000. Just to be really clear. So we are in a comparatively strong position, as you rightly note, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Jonathan, I wonder, and this is a suggestion, not a request. It's whether we consider it might be useful for future board meetings to look at the key operational plan delivery requirements and actually have a very quick summary of our relative performance, because it is strong in South West London. It's right that we are not complacent, but we are outperforming the rest of London in a whole host of metrics, including urgent and emergency care, which we were talking about earlier. So I think that would also provide a bit of assurance to the board moving forward. We can discuss that offline. Thank you. We could move to our final committee report, which is Remuneration Committee. Mercy, across to you.
Isn't it? Yeah. So obviously, because Ruth Bailey has now left the board, but she was able to chair this committee, where we discussed a number of things, especially particularly fixed-term contracts and a potential compulsory redundancy case approval that we had to look at before it went to NHS England. Obviously, the annual pay award agenda for change, and also announcements about the outcomes of recruitment for our new non-exec members and associate non-executive members, which we were very, well, certainly I was very happy to see coming along. I think they still need to go through the fit and proper persons test, so but we will be having new non-executive members as well. Yes, I didn't really want to kind of add anything. Obviously, Mike, you and Sarah were there as well, if people wanted to add anything. Unfortunately, Karen isn't here if it's about kind of redundancy and the ongoing work that we're doing on that.
Sarah, did you want to say anything on the ongoing redundancy process?
Yeah, well, currently our business case is with NHS England. I believe there's a meeting tomorrow. The NHS England will be considering our business case, and we will await the outcome of that, and then there'll be a process following that, depending on what the outcome is.
Which presumably is Treasury?
It would depend on what the outcome is. there are about 3 options
right,
I've got
fine.
currently.
Okay,
in the,
joy of joys.
So we will, yeah.
We will come back to that and report, hopefully, the outcome of it at the next board meeting. But if it's not the outcome, it will be where we're at in whatever process we have entered.
Can I just say, not all of what we are putting forward needs to go to Treasury. There will be some parts of it that will, but not all of it. So there will be a combination of things, probably, as an outcome.
Great. Thank you. Sarah, it's across to you for our Chief Exec's report.
Yes, I would like to just highlight a couple of areas, if that's okay, Chair. I mean, I will take it as mostly read, but there are a couple of areas that I just wanted to say something very positive about. One is around our staff conference, which happened on Friday. We had a really good attendance there, and I've had lots of very positive feedback. And what we've been doing is, because we have been making the 30% reduction, and this was about launching the new ways of working with the staff that we have in South West London, and we have worked with them prior to the conference on our values, of which they are around respect, integrity, collaboration, excellence and ambition. And those are the 5 areas that the staff themselves working with us have identified as areas that they wanted to work on. But it links directly into the first paragraph around the response to the riots, because I think what came out was a lot of discussion around how we treat each other, how actually the culture around our treatment of diversity within the organisation is going to be key to how we are successful in the future. So I thought that was a kind of good link, because I think actually we were very positive about the way in which London came out in support of colleagues who were from black minority ethnic groups and black and brown staff, as you call them, Vanessa. That was a very positive thing in London when people came on the streets to say positively, we don't agree with this. And I think within our staff groups, they're also saying the same thing, and we want to make sure that that's part of what we do going forward. So there is a link there directly. The other thing that I wanted to just say thank you to general practice again is because the GP survey results are out, and what that shows is that actually we have some really positive results for South West London from our GP practices around the national patient survey. I think that also links into things like collective action, because actually a lot of our practices, we know that there is a significant concern in general practice about the future, but also our practices are delivering well and responding well to local patients, and I mean they do really care about our local population, so I just thought it was worth putting that forward. So I just wanted to link those two as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Sarah. I'm going to have to say that I have been stopped by half a dozen staff, most of which I've never spoken to before today, to say what a fantastic conference, what a fantastic event the staff conference was. So, testament to the team, well done. On the GP survey, I was at Region on Monday, and a number of people were commenting on the really good performance of South West London GPs. So please pass on the thanks of the board to our GPs. It is really, really good news to have that. So we move on to any other business. I've not been notified in advance of any other business for this this stage of the meeting. Can I check there's any other business? In which case I will formally close the meeting and open the questions, open to public questions. Wendy, I can see your hand is up. We'll make sure you've got a microphone.
As I say at this meeting, my name's Wendy Micklewright. I hallucinate, I hear voices, but I'm not ill and I don't take psychiatric drugs. Earlier this year, I received a letter from the NHS inviting me to have a smear test. I've been having smear tests all my adult life. I find them painful and stressful. So this time, and it was via a letter, and I had to contact my GP. So this time I decided, no, I wasn't going to do it. And that decision concerned me slightly. So I was at a conference and I was talking to someone in the line about that. And they mentioned self-sampling, HPV. So I'm assuming that that's very similar to the bowel cancer checks. So I thought I'd experiment with AI on my browser. So I asked AI how many people die from cervical cancer in the UK. The answer came back that it was about 850 people, and that was based on data from the cancer research, and that was from 2017 to 2019. Of the cases, about 520 cases, that's per year, the 850, 520 cases are linked to deprivation. So I know that one of the focuses of the ICB is about inequalities, so I think that's worth bearing in mind. I also saw a report on the National Institute of Health Research, which says that these self-sampling is also good for the environment. I asked an additional question of artificial intelligence about HPV self-sampling cost efficiency in the UK. It came back with a study in Brunei that says self-sampling was acceptable, and also a report from Peru and Finland that says that it was cost effective. Another part of the cancer research said that over 50% of women who were eligible for screening would prefer self-sampling. Last week I was at the King's Fund, and Steve Russell, who's the Chief Delivery Officer and National Director for Vaccinations and Screening for the NHS, seemed to be promoting self-sampling. So I think there's been a test done in South London, so I think it's something that the ICB should seriously consider. Moving on to inequalities, and Sarah mentioned something about the riots, and there was a report from the Equality Trust, which I think is based in Croydon, which says that the link between inequalities and the rise in fascism or the far right, however you want to use the terminology, there is a link there. So I think the work about inequalities need to be happening at pace. And Public Health Scotland said that poverty in the UK, well, it was in Scotland, was costing the NHS £2.3 billion. So if we look at inequalities within the within the mental health system, there's a report data from 2023 that was reported in the Independent that says that 3/4 of children sectioned under the Mental Health Act are in fact girls or young women, whatever language you want to use. For me, once again, that indicates sexism. When we look at people being sectioned, so I thought, well, let's look at it from another angle. So let's look at it at cost. So again, I asked artificial intelligence, how much does it cost to section someone under the Mental Health Act? And I'm not sure if it was one of my freedom of information requests a few years back, but the answer came back. A source was South West London, St George's. It costs £429 a day for someone to be sectioned. So section 2 is normally 28 days, so you can work out the maths on that one. Then there was another report, I think this was done using freedom of information as well, in 2022 that says women are more likely to be prescribed with antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs. So again, that rang alarm bells for me. I listened to I spent nearly 2 hours yesterday talking to someone who's on mental health drugs, wanted to get off them, been through the cycle of trying to come off the drugs, being sectioned, and they were very anxious and very fearful that coming off the drugs would be interpreted as them having a relapse. And once again, I'd like to highlight James Davis's work, Cracked, Why Psychiatry is Doing More Harm Than Good, and Sedated, How Modern Capitalism is Creating a Mental Health Problem. So as an act of goodwill, I bought this book, which I listened to the podcast because, as you hopefully know, I'm dyslexic, and so I find podcasts easier to assess the information. And this book was written by 2 people with lived experience of trying to come off psychiatric drugs. One of them's called Mark Horowitz and the other one's called David Taylor. And on the back of it, it says, in 2023, the World Health Organization and the UN call for patients as a human right to be informed of their right to discontinue treatments and to receive support to do so. The friend I was on the phone call with yesterday, they weren't getting support. They didn't feel supported. They felt very frightened and very anxious that trying to come off the drugs and how that affects people would be misinterpreted as mental illness. So this will probably make more sense to you. So I'm hoping that it will help someone. I won't go into the details of the summary of it, but basically what it says is that coming off drugs and the side effects isn't a linear thing. That's my understanding. And the other thing is, even when the drugs leave your system, then you still might experience problems up to a year later. Thank you for listening. And lastly but not least, we come on to, once again, electroconvulsive treatment. So I thought, okay, I've said, that the World Health Organization and the UN are calling for an end to coercive practices within the mental health system. So I thought, and the petition asking for that to happen has reached nearly 136,000 people. So I thought I'll ask AI and see what comes up. How much does electroconvulsive treatment cost the UK? And I was quite shocked at one of their references. One of their references was a private practice called Cardinal Clinic, which is based in Windsor, which is offering electroconvulsive treatment, and you have to be an inpatient, so there's that cost, but they're charging £1,200 per treatment. Most people will receive between 6 and 24 sessions. As we know, this disproportionately affects older women. And then this morning, before I came here, I was reading Mad in America, and I noticed that John Reed had done some further research, and I suspect this might not surprise some people because it didn't surprise me. People who experience electroconvulsive treatment are more likely to have heart problems than the general population, which isn't surprising when you're putting, I won't go into the details, but if you look at the petition, you'll see some people's personal testaments about what that involves.
Wendy, thank you as ever for your contributions. In relation to the HPV issue, I'm going to ask Callie to comment. And I know that this is a really live issue. I've had a number of female friends having conversations with me, so I'd be really keen to get Callie's expert opinion. In terms of the health inequalities agenda, I'm going to ask John to make sure that he picks up those references that you've made and we can incorporate that into our work. Similarly, I know Vanessa is happy to have a conversation with you after this meeting. But Callie, on the HPV.
Thank you, and thank you, Wendy, for raising that. And just to reassure you, both as the host of RM Partners, but I also work nationally with Steve Russell, who you referenced in the screening programme. We are rolling out self-sampling as quickly as we can, so that's much more acceptable for people. And a combination of self-sampling and HPV vaccination means we should be able to eradicate or dramatically reduce the risk of cervical cancer. So I can't remember off the top of my head what the time frame is for us locally, but we are doing that work supported nationally, and it's very important, I think, for the public that we do that as fast as we can. So it's a thing for the NHS, and we're doing that with all our partners in RM Partners across this patch. And I'm happy to come back and just confirm time frame. I simply can't remember it off the top of my head. But thank you for raising it, and we will go as fast as we can.
Callie, I think it would be great if we could have a very short item on this at the next meeting, because I think it is a real interest of public concern. And yeah, thank you, and thank you for all your national work in this space as well. Really appreciate it. At that point, I'm going to actually close the questions from the public. Thank everybody for their attendance and remind you that the next meeting is in November. The date of that meeting is the 20th of November, and it's at this site here, 120 Broadway. We do have the AGM next week, and the venue for that, Charlotte, is
the Everyday Church just around the corner in Wimbledon, 30th of September. 30th
of September. We do hope to see you at the AGM. Thank you all very much.
No, I'm sorry.